Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So, new season's out, been toying around with the new cards a bit, and ended up hitting Day 1 Infinite with both of them, coming in at rank 12 last night. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the decks and give some initial impressions on the decks, as well as the two new cards we got yesterday, Eson and Agamotto. So I'm going to start out with the Esson deck, also using Wiccan, who's in Spotlight Caches alongside him. So Esson was a card myself and many people were a little bit lower on, mainly because if you saw the data mines, there was an old version of this card that looked really broken with a kind of interesting build around of giving your whole deck extra power if none of the cards in your deck were matching power. And so it felt like a lot of people were sad that that design got replaced for this new design, which is essentially just grabbing a created by card from your hand and slamming it into play in Esson's lane. And yeah, I get it. The other design was a bit more exciting. It also would have been way more broken. I think that would have actually broke the game if you were giving your whole deck +2 power. So I can see why they ended up not going in that direction. But one of the concerns I had was, well, it feels like this might just be an Arsham card. And as someone who isn't a big fan of Arsham, that was a bit disappointing to me. But I'm happy to say that the card is definitely not just an Arsham card. And the deck I ended up finding a lot of success with was Wiccan. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Wiccan can take advantage of these card generation cards. So Wiccan's getting you that extra energy, so you have energy to play your card generation cards, whether they be from Coulson, White Queen, who has actually been surprisingly decent, Iron Patriot, the arrows from Kate Bishop. This does a lot of card generation, and then having the Wiccan to play those cards a little bit more easily, or to ramp out an Esson so that way he plays the cards for you, is pretty big. Wiccan deck's pretty straightforward at this point. We are running Quicksilver as the guaranteed 1-drop. That way it just makes it a little easier to build the rest of the deck, knowing we always have that guaranteed 1-on-1. And it can be helpful for cards like Iron Patriot, because if you follow up a Quicksilver with an Iron Patriot, and your opponent didn't really do too much in the early game, they often have a hard time contesting the lane. Since we do have a lot of card generation stuff here, we are running Victoria Hand, who puts a lot of power on the board. We're running Copycat for a bit of surprise factor. And in general, this deck has a lot of surprise factor because we have so much card generation, especially from random sources like Coulson and Iron Patriot, that it can be tricky for the opponent to play around at times. Legion has been one of the flex spots, but it is a game-winning flex spot. I feel like most people don't play around Legion in a Wiccan deck, and you can really punish them for it. And it lets this deck give a nod to things like Mr. Negative or other magic combo decks that want the game to go long. Since they're not expecting the Legion, you can often take them for a lot of cubes by ending the game early. But Esson in this deck has been quite good. If you're able to play it out on turn 5, he'll usually yoink 2 things and just win a lane on his own. And there are even situations where, maybe you don't get the Iron Patriot off or White Queen grabs a really big thing. Sometimes just playing Eson as a big dude on the final turn to pull another big dude out of your hand is enough, because this deck does have pretty good early tempo. It has a lot of good cards to play out early, get good points on the board, and then ramp into your late game threats. Magneto was the other late game threat I opted to run in this build, taking your opponent by surprise a bit. Also a good payoff of Wiccan, getting to play Magneto on 5. Sometimes you can clog up your opponents, which sets up for an easy win with Esson or your other cards. We are running a tech card in here in Gorgon. Gorgon's really good right now. This card, I think a lot of people were excited for it. It came out and it didn't hit quite as hard as a lot of people were expecting it to. And well, that's because the meta wasn't really card generation stuff. Most of the popular meta decks just didn't care about the effect. And now with people trying out things like Esson and Agamotto, there are way more card generated cards going on in decks, and Gorgon is getting a whole lot of value. Especially in mirror matches. If you end up seeing a lot of these style of decks, Gorgon is just absolutely backbreaking in the mirror, especially against an opposing Wiccan deck where you can just really wreck their curve. And it has the added benefit of giving you an edge versus things like Arsham or Thanos on top of that. So yeah, I was pretty pleased with this deck. If you're someone who is a fan of the card generation archetype and was hoping to find a way to use Esson without Arshim, I really think that the Wiccan version is the way to go. And I think you can probably build this deck in a bit more of a budget fashion if you really want to. I do think cards like Iron Patriot and Victoria Hand are big upgrades to it, but I think that you can probably get by just running more budget focused, just general card generation stuff to get you some value and stuff to play in the late game and stuff to have Eson pull. So yeah, it's a pretty good deck. I really liked it, and the two most important cards to get in it, Wiccan and Esson, are both available in this Spotlight week. So if you're missing both of them, might not be a bad week to be opening. Next up, let's talk about Agamotto. So I was really excited for Agamotto. I have probably spent the most time building Agamotto decks than I have for pretty much any other new card releasing in Snap in as long as I can remember. This card gives me huge original Thanos vibes, where it's just such a different thing than we have traditionally had in Marvel Snap, and I think it's going to take a little bit of time to really find the absolute best way to use this card, because Marvel Snap is a 12-card deck game. Sure, you have Thanos and you have Arshim, which make bigger decks, but they both have a bit of a thing to help counterbalance that. Thanos gets to draw cards with his stones, Arshim gets that extra energy. They both have something strong to offset what is normally a big downside. And Agamotto spells, they don't do that, right? They are very strong spells in their own right, so that's kind of how they're trying to offset the downside. But Agamotto feels like it definitely does take a hit in the consistency department, because you are just less likely to draw any of your specific cards on a given turn with more cards in your deck. That's just how it works. But the payoff for that is that the cards you're putting in your deck are fairly strong, and this is true. The spells from Agamotto are fairly strong, but I don't think they're quite as generically strong as I was expecting them to be, or at least not generically strong enough to really justify him in a majority of decks. I think Agamotto is a card, at least from my early impressions with it, where you really have to build your deck in a way to get the maximum value out of the good things it is trying to do. Most of the spells are rather good. The big things that Agamotto does that I found very impressive are the images, obviously using images to make some smaller things like the Captain America shield, a used up King Eitri, an extra Mysterio clone, turning those things into a big threat like a copy of Mockingbird, a copy of Sasquatch, Cassandra Nova, Galacta. Doing that, really strong. Also, taking your turn 3 or turn 4 off to have an extra 4 energy on the next turn, also really strong. Winds of Watum, fairly strong as well. Just being able to potentially clog up your opponent or reallocate their power in a way they're not expecting, also very strong. And the one where you get to search up Agamotto and give him +3, it's the weakest, but it's also the cheapest. So you're essentially having a 1/3 that tutors you a big dude, and being able to tutor up a big dude is relevant because you want to have at least one big card for the potential using of images or just to have another big thing to play late in the game. So I have quite liked that. I've found Agamotto's been pretty good, but you really want to find the best way to maximize the synergy of your spells. And I think the strongest one to maximize the synergy of, and the one that probably requires the most work to maximize the synergy of, is images. So images creating copies of your highest power card in the lane. We have a lot of good cards we can copy here. Cass, Mockingbird or Sasquatch, Galacta, Rocket and Groot, sometimes Copycat. There are a lot of good targets, but the thing is that you actually need cards on board that you want to transform, and this deck has a plethora of them. It has the Sam Wilson shield. It has Mysterio clones. It has a King Eitri you might have used up. It can have arrows from Kate Bishop. I think decks like this, or maybe a Zoo-style deck where you already are wanting to put stuff on the board for your general game plan, and then once you've gotten some use out of that, you can upgrade it and transform them. I think that's the way to go about best taking advantage of one of the strongest effects Agamotto has to offer. And this deck does that very naturally. We can run all these cards, and you can play as kind of just a regular tempo deck, but the Agamotto spells just kind of weave into your curve very naturally, which is really what I think you want to be doing with this card, because in a lot of the other decks I tried, sometimes it just feels awkward. As strong as a card as Images is, if you aren't building your deck around using it, there are times where you end up with a bunch of spells in hand and you just don't really have much to do with them, particularly Images if you haven't been flooding out on the board. So yeah, I've really enjoyed this deck. If you like kind of mid-rangey Mockingbird Sasquatch type of piles, this is a good way to go. I think, again, Gorgon a really good tech right now against other people playing Agamotto, against people playing Eson, card generation stuff, Arshem, etc. Gorgon, I think, is just doing real well this week. Sam Wilson's great because not only does he give you the shield for Images, for reducing Mockingbird, but even if you don't get those cards, he's just a goated 2-drop. He's just a scaling 2-drop threat. Really good. Same kind of thing with Kate, where she just has good synergy with our deck. The arrows synergize very well with Mockingbird and Sasquatch. Mysterio, mainly for the Images, but also for Mockingbird and Sasquatch. It is very easy to get both those cards down for very cheap in this deck. Cassandra Nova, another nod to Arshem, while also giving us a bit of a good target for Images on curve. You can go with Mysterio on 2, Cassandra Nova on 3, Images on 4 in the shield lane, and that is going to put some massive affliction on your opponent's deck while getting you a lane of really big powered cards. Rocket and Groot and Copycat, definitely kind of flex spots. I think a variety of cards could be included here. Worth noting that Copycat does not banish herself if she copies a spell. Same thing with Iron Lad. That's not how I expected that interaction to work, but it definitely makes the card quite a bit stronger. Galacta just giving us a little bit of a power boost, also has good synergy with the ramp card from Agamotto. If you skip turn 3, you get an extra 4 energy on 4. You can play Galacta alongside another decent like 3-drop or smaller card and get that Galacta buff immediately, which has proved to be fairly powerful. And Agamotto himself is a pretty solid threat. I mean, our big threats in this deck, other than him, Bird and Sasquatch, don't actually cost 6. We're usually reducing them, so having just one big threat that you can slam down that is oftentimes a 5/13 is pretty solid as well. And again, Eitri has been really solid in most of the Agamotto decks that I have been testing, because he gets you one card deeper into the deck, he can find you a key spell, and once he has been used up and you have gotten that draw, you really don't mind throwing him away into a image clone. So he really does check all the boxes that you want to be seeing in Agamotto, and I think he's going to become a mainstay in these kind of decks for that reason. So yeah, those are the decks I ended up taking to Day 1 Infinite. They're both fun to play and surprisingly effective, so if you're looking for a way to make use of the new cards, these are the two that I would wholeheartedly recommend. Links in the description if you want to copy and import the decks into the game for yourself. But let me know what you're thinking about the new cards, about the decks, about the season so far. I'd love to hear it. That's going to wrap it up for this video, though. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.